sun was slowly slipping towards the horizon, coloring the sky with warm pink and orange tones. We had just arrived on the island after a long trip and felt the tension finally begin to let go. This time on vacation promised to be special, without my dad. He couldn't take the vacation because of work, and while some might count that as a disadvantage, for me it was, on the contrary, a great relief. I didn't have to listen to his constant rebukes, annoying remarks and strict control. Finally, freedom, albeit not quite complete. We stayed with my mom and sister, and at first the idea even seemed intriguing to me. My sister Monica has just celebrated her 25th birthday and immediately decided that the vacation for her will be not just a vacation, but a real escape from the usual life. She has always been a bright, bold, sometimes defiant girl, with long dark hair, tan skin and a daring gaze that often mesmerized those around her. Mom, although she had recently turned 48, didn't stick to the side of modern life either. She looked about 20 years younger, and sometimes even I forgot that it was my mother, not my friend, in front of me. We settled into a cozy house overlooking the ocean, surrounded by palm trees and a garden. There were 3 spacious bedrooms in the house, and everyone got a room to their liking. After sorting out the incidents, we decided to take a short nap to recuperate after our long journey. Closer to evening we met in the kitchen discussing vacation plans. My sister looked at us with an enigmatic smile, and I could tell from her expression that some plan was already brewing in her head. You know, since we're on this beautiful island and away from everything familiar, why don't we relax a little? She began with a slight look of amusement. Dad isn't around, and no one here knows us. Mom raised an eyebrow, but didn't object. She didn't seem to mind getting out of her routine and enjoying a little relaxation herself. You're right, Monica, she said with a warm smile. Dad doesn't know we're here. Isn't that the essence of a real vacation? We all laughed, and I felt that a special atmosphere would have settled between us, a confidence and freedom, as if for this brief period we were just second travelers, friends eager to get away from our usual roles. Mom quickly gathered us in the pool. I jumped in first and immediately felt myself dissolving into the cool waves. Mom joined us, and at that moment Monica appeared on the terrace, wrapping a bath towel carelessly around her. We all froze for a moment. She was wearing a tiny bathing suit, slightly covering her form, and against the setting sun she looked like an outlandish, tantalizing shadow. Are you really serious about vacationing like this? Mom asked, frowning slightly, but there was more smile than reproach in her voice. Monica only shrugged her shoulders, smiling back at her. We had a deal, Mom, she said with a slight challenge. No one here will tell me what to do or how to do it. Isn't that our agreement? Mom, of course, didn't argue. We just enjoyed the moment, as if for a while we had forgotten about all the conventions. Something magical hung in the air, a mixture of freedom and the unknown that keeps on dreaming and forgetting. The hours passed and the night enveloped the island in starlight. After a fun evening at the pool, everyone retired to their rooms, but sleep didn't come right away. I lay staring up at the ceiling, going over in my head thoughts of how oddly nice it felt to get away from my father's gaze. Why do I need all this control and his ever intense questions? And the further away I got, the more he realized that on this vacation, maybe I could get to know the family from a whole different side. At some point, I heard footsteps creeping down the hallway. A quiet knock on the door made me flinch. In the darkness, opening the door slightly, I saw my mom. She looked worried, but had a soft smile playing on her face, as if she had someone to talk to or share her observation with. Sorry to wake you, she said, sitting down next to me. Just wanted to ask how you're doing here? Better than I expected, I replied. Thank you for organizing all this. Her gaze lingered on me just below the sunlight, and I felt as if the silence between us was too intense, too old. She put her hand on my shoulder, squeezed it lightly, and for a second I felt my heart beat harder. You know, Mom said softly, sometimes I want to get away from everything I'm used to, too. Just to be myself. That evening seemed to establish some invisible boundary between the familiar family role and something new, more grown-up, that was emerging between us in the shadows of this distant, alien island. Mom stayed close, and we sat in silence until she shook my hand and whispered. It's going to be okay, Billy. We're going to have an amazing vacation. Waking up at dawn, we took our time getting ready, chatting and bantering, each of us in anticipation of what awaited us on the beach today. I could feel the lightness as waves we hadn't seen yet were already enveloping us. Without Dad, this trip seemed freer. We didn't have to listen to his strict rules and remarks, which meant we could afford a little more. Mom was calm as usual, my sister seemed to be just spreading her wings. We arrived at the beach early, so Resource chose a spot closer to the water, even before the sun's rays began to burn the sand. We spread out a towel and settled down. My sister immediately took notice of the outfit around her, a short, sun-bleached top, an almost transparent cape and tiny shorts. I noticed many on the beach, men and even women, casting glances at her, watching her every move approvingly or enviously. She looked confident in her beauty, and probably at some moments there was an ineffable sense of power. If her father had seen how she attracted the attention of those around her, he would certainly have made her cover her gaze. But today it was just us here, and no stern word could stop her. I watched her from afar as she walked along the shore, creating her own passage amongst the crowd. While Mom went to sunbathe, my sister decided to take a dip in the sea, and I went with her. The water was cool, and for the first few seconds it felt like a challenge, but then, as the waves washed over my shoulders, the coolness was replaced by a feeling of complete bliss. Sister frolicked in the water, laughing and seeming to draw the weight of the day to her. At one point she turned to me and, shaking her wet hair out of her face, remarked with a chuckle, "Billy, why don't you teach me how to swim like a real athlete?" Her eyes rolled with appeal. We started swimming, competing to see who could get to the buoys the fastest, and at one point she lingered a little longer underwater, and when she surfaced, her face reflected the shadow of the deep. "Did you lose something?" I asked, stepping closer. "Yeah. A necklace. My mom gave it to me." She darkened and I realized it wasn't just a piece of jewelry for her face. We dived and tried to find the missing chain, but she had sand for that, and we searched in vain. Her sister exhaled heavily, resentment and frustration in her passage, but she soon looked up in her hands. She was independent, sometimes even too much so, as if to show no weakness. We returned to the shore where Mom was already waiting for us, watching us tumbling in the water with a smile. Seeing our confusion, she raised her eyebrows. "Is everything okay?" I opened my mouth, but my sister beat me to it. "Everything's fine, Mom. Just a little wet." We returned to our towel, and I noticed my sister looking at that sea in a new way, as if it had taken something away from her. But a minute later, she was back to her poems. Taking off her shorts and remaining in her swimsuit, she settled down on the towel, slipping her sunglasses over her face. Mom sat down next to me and, apparently catching my attention, offered me an offending cream. "Wait, Billy," she smiled. "Put some on me, or I'll burn." I carefully began to put the cream on her shoulders and then on her back, trying to do everything as quickly as possible so as not to draw attention to myself. My sister, watching, grinned. "Isn't it time you had a sick cream in the shower? Otherwise we'll be treating burns in the evening." From her light teasing, I suddenly felt embarrassed. The beach, the sun, this strange intimacy that had arisen between us that day. But something in her words seemed too personal. I noticed how she continued to attract the gazes of the vacationers, and I felt that this trip was no longer an ordinary vacation. That day on the beach, something changed in both of us. I returned home late in the afternoon, when the heat of the day had already begun to abate, but there was still a slight haze of summer heat lingering in the atmosphere. After our day at the beach, it seemed that the rest of the evening had passed quietly, but there was still some tense, inexplicable energy in the space. It was business as usual. Mom took her first bath, leaving her towels on the floor, and had already gone to make dinner. I, without waiting my turn, went up to my room to at least catch my breath. Suddenly the bathroom door opened and I heard someone pass out. Looking around, I saw Monica, and for a moment I felt everything around me slow down. She was standing in the doorway, having just come out of the shower, with damp strands of hair that flowed down her shoulders, low to her collarbones. Her skin, slightly tanned after a day in the sun, shone with a damp sheen, the towel wrapped around her in a way that felt like it was ready to slip off at any second. I couldn't look away. It was like I'd seen her for the first time and was speechless. All that came out of me at that moment was an almost whispered, "You were beautiful." Monica grinned a little, but her gaze remained unchanged, probing. There was something in that gaze, at that moment, that sent a chill down my spine. She walked slowly toward me, and I took a step toward her, almost without realizing what I was doing. We were so close that I could feel her breath on my skin. I touched her shoulder, and in that moment, the room itself seemed to fill with a kind of imperceptible but slightly halting silence. I hugged her, as firmly as I'd probably never hugged her before. I felt her heart beat in time with mine, and whispered a little in her ear, "I can't resist you." In that moment, it felt like the whole world had disappeared, and it was just us, here and now. But exactly a second later, a heavy realization hit me: this was wrong, too weird. I backed away instantly and, almost without looking her in the eye, I sprinted out of the room. Already because of her attitude, I stopped, catching my breath as if I'd just run a marathon. I was overwhelmed with feelings, mixed and inexplicable, as if they were tormenting me from the inside, not allowing me to breathe or realize what was going on at all. I floundered in my room, my mind in chaos. Words, images, and emotions all merged together, turning into an endless internal monologue. I realized that I wanted to forget this moment, but at the same time, I wanted to keep it in my mind. I literally flew into my room, slammed the door shut, and the silence took over, deafening and enveloping me. My head was boiling, and my chest felt tight, like someone was tying a tight knot. I tried to gather my thoughts, but they scattered like sand through my fingers. Too many questions, too many perplexing questions. How did this happen? I asked myself, but the answers only drowned in the lingering anxiety. Every moment, that detail came back to me, making my heart pound with redoubled vigor. I blamed myself, feeling it went against everything I had taught myself, everything I thought it was. But the more I thought about her gaze, about her quiet, almost imperceptible sigh, the more I lost control. I ruffled my hair furiously and forced myself to stand and walk across the room, obviously trying to burn away this excuse that was eating me from the inside out. But despite my efforts, thoughts of her were once again taking over my mind. I tried to convince myself that it had to stop, that it should stay in the past, but everything inside remained seething. No, this is wrong. This is wrong, I muttered to myself under my breath, trying to keep my thoughts sober. At that moment, the door slammed behind me. I turned around and saw my mother, her face extremely surprised and concerned. She froze, looking at me, her gaze was penetrating, as if she was thinking about everything else that had happened inside me. "What's wrong with you, son? Why are you screaming like that?" Her voice was soft, but you could hear the anxiety in it. I wanted to answer, to explain everything, but the words stuck in my throat. It was impossible to tell her what was going on in my head, it was my own personal chaos that no one could understand. I opened up, not finding the strength to look her in the eyes, afraid she might suspect something. After she left, I just collapsed on the bed, stunned, exhausted, and unable to figure out what to do next. I realized that the world around me had lost its clear boundaries, turning into a confusing maze of experiences and mysteries that I didn't know how to solve. Meanwhile, Monica, on the contrary, seemed to feel more confident. It was as if she were reaching out to me, her gaze becoming somehow different, as if she were seeking my attention. She appeared near me more and more often, throwing me brief glances and smiles, and I knew she wanted to continue, wanted to strengthen the bond I had built up between us. But I couldn't let that happen. I realized that things had gone too far, and if we continued down this path, the consequences could be disastrous. I tried to keep my distance, exposing her when she remembered to strike up a conversation, walking away if she got too close. Every time I saw her, the same conflicting feelings flared up again in my soul, and I knew this struggle was not over. The inner discord gave me no peace. I realized that I needed to take a step back, to put things back the way they were, but no matter how hard I tried, this struggle continued to plague me from the inside.